learn it the hard way, if you will. So what I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about what I learned, how I think about platform PMing, especially in the context of B2B enterprise SaaS, and why should you guys care about it? Why is it important, especially now in this moment in time? Uh, a little bit about me, and please, team, please feel free to stop me. It's hard for me to like look at the Zoom chat, but if there is a question that's pressing, just ask it, or Adam, just stop me if you see a question in the chat. Yeah, my name is Sanket, based here in San Francisco. Been here for almost 11 years now. I think I have spent most of my career in enterprise SaaS. So I started as at Oracle as a security engineer just a long time back. Wanted to move more customer facing, so I joined PwC, did a lot of consulting work there, consulting with a lot of companies here in the Valley, Google, LinkedIn, Logitech. So that was like super fun. Then I wanted to be a part of like a smaller startup, if you will. So I joined a company called Medallia. I was in their customer success team, transitioned to product there for more than 5 years. I joined when Medallia was Series E and then went through IPO. Actually got an opportunity to go to NYSC for a bell ringing. So that was a very unique experience that I had. And then from there, I wanted to go even smaller. So I joined a company called Reliance AI. I joined it at seed stage here based in SF. Joined as employee number 9. So I would say like from a PM perspective or just from a SaaS perspective, I think across my journey, like Reliance was a very foundational experience for me because there was just a lot of new things that we had to build as a part of that company. So was there until recently, a couple of months back. Then I decided to take a break, and I'm now diving headfirst into building my own thing. One of the things I'm betting on is this trend of micro SaaS. I think we're all going to see a lot of these small SaaS solutions for unique problems popping up here and there. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm building a product called Albus for parenting with intention, and would love to talk about it at some point if anyone is interested. I think the common arc across my journey has been enterprise SaaS, and I've spent a lot of time in security, privacy, governance, data, and that's how I sort of led and went into a platform. Outside of all of this, yeah, love to backpack, love to run, love to hike, just love spending time outside. One of my very favorite trips was the Root Burn track in New Zealand. We did, I think we backpacked there, but it rained all the 3 days. So couldn't really see a lot, but it was still a very memorable experience. All right. So I want to cover the content today in 3 acts. One is I want to sort of explain what is platform PMing, at least what's my definition of it, how I think about it. Why should you guys care about it? The second is how do you do it? So let's say you find yourself wanting a platform PM role, or if you find yourself in a position where you have to define what platform PM means in your company, I want to sort of share a framework for that. And then finally, Act 3 is what it means for you. What kind of companies typically have platform PM roles? When is a good time to have it? What does it mean in the moment in time we are here today with AI and how it's changing platform? So I'm going to blaze through some of this content, and yeah, hopefully we'll stick on time here. All right. All right, Act 1. And before I actually get in and before I bias you all with my content, I would love to hear, maybe drop something in the chat or feel free to shout it out. But yeah, I guess what are some things that come to mind when you all think about platform PMing? And just drop something in the chat if you want, or feel free to shout it out. Foundational infrastructure. Okay, coordination. That Andrew, that's a very underrated point, but absolutely agree. Sandra says architecture, big picture, both very interesting and good points. Absolutely, architecture is super key. Platform is truly the big picture, and I'm going to make a case for that. So I'm glad, Michael, you said that. Stability, solutions architecture, platform to support other product teams, team enablers. That's great. That's actually, sorry, go ahead. Someone had a thought to share? Okay. Sorry, I thought I heard some background noise. That was great. That is exactly some of the things that I agree with almost all of them. And I think all those are really critical as we think about platform teams and as we think about building those teams. So let me tell you what I thought platform PMing was when I was a young, naive guy. And I thought it's mostly back end work and big misconception. I think throughout my experience, I've learned that platform PM really shapes the end user experience in very apparent ways. And B, it really shapes deal flow. So if you're an enterprise SaaS trying to sell to enterprise customers, you will start seeing how platform really impacts that. And I'm going to make a case for that here. I think the second thing that I always thought was, oh, it's way too technical, not like real PM work, super technical, some backend stuff. And I think some of you brought this up in chat, but the whole coordination, enablement, enabler, it's actually one of the most intense PM seats one can have. There is a lot of like influence, drama, prioritization, commercial judgment you need. So it has all the things that you need to be a PM, and it's actually quite intense in some ways. And finally, I'll say one of the things I always thought that, oh, maybe you have to be an engineer to be a platform PM. And not true, again. I think what you do need to have is some amount of technical curiosity, but you don't have to be an engineer. I think engineers can be good platform PMs. They sort of up level themselves, while PMs or non-technical can have technical curiosity and then be platform PMs as well. So I think these are some of the things that I always hear from people I talk to, and I thought these misconceptions myself, so wanted to clear those up. Before I define what platform PM means for me, I think I wanted to leave everyone with a very visceral sense of how it actually shows up day to day, right? So as an end user, I'm sure every one of us uses tech products. It actually shows up in very real ways. And sometimes it's invisible, sometimes it's messy, but it shows up, and I'm sure every one of you interacted with something to do with platform. And as a leader, it shows up in your sales cycles and sales deals today. Every single enterprise deal that you as a product leader are trying to close, something related to a platform will show up. And I'm going to talk about what. So maybe let me talk about the first bit is where do you see day to day? Now, I think this was a good example that I could think of. Like a lot of cars today, like think like Tesla or Rivian or whatnot, we don't use these things called keys anymore, right? They either we use our phones to open our cars, we use key cards, we use our watch to open the car. And all three of them all lead to the same thing where the someone is making a decision, some service is making a decision that is this the right user? And should I open the car for this user or not? Right. And all three of them, very different channels, are doing the same thing. And I think this is a great example of where platform mindset comes in. There's most likely a service in Tesla or Rivian that does this, while you as an end user don't feel the difference. It's not that if I use my key card, the door opens 5 seconds faster, versus if I use my phone, the door opens like 10 seconds slower, right? It's the same thing. So I think this is a good sort of mental model that these shared things that power a bunch of different products, it likely always ends up in some platform capability. I think a bad example that I could think of was, and Google is actually terrible at this, even across all their marketing. I love Google products, FYI, but they have had this string of products, and I don't know how many of you guys remember, but if the job to be done, if you will, was to, okay, I want to message other people on the Google platform, they've had this string of products across the years. They've had Google Talk, Wave, Voice, Buzz, Messenger, Hangouts, Messages, Allo, Duo. And I got lost just thinking about all these different products that they've shipped. And the most likely cause for this is they might have Google is just so big. They have all these different teams working on all these different frameworks themselves. And there's no one single consistent way to do this. And that's a problem for you as an end user, right? Because, and this has happened to me, there was literally, I think it was last year, I was looking at Google Chat on the App Store, and there were these two apps on the App Store. There was Google Chat and there's Google Chat RCS. And I'm like, I'm an end user and I have no idea what this means. So there's a lot of confusion if you don't take a platform approach to building things. And we've seen this play out in the market. And here's one example of it. I think my third example of being a leader and where platform thinking comes in is if any of you have been close to a sales process, right? Like where you've built a product, you're trying to sell that product now with your sales team. And if you're in B2B and selling to enterprises, you know that every enterprise will do a security review of your product. Literally, there's a check in every vendor onboarding flow where they'll do a security review. And they do it based on a lot of frameworks. They'll either like check your SOC 2 compliance. There's a framework called SIG that does it. And I have a few questions that typically you see, but you start your team will have to answer a lot of these questions. Does your product support audit logging? Does your product support exporting logs to a different system like Splunk or Sentinel-1 or whatnot? Do you support single sign-on? Do you support RBAC? And saying no to these questions is really hard because if you're trying to sell to enterprise, if any of these are no, you know that deal is going to take a long time. And the security teams are going to create a lot of trouble for you. So I think if you are in a leader capacity or if you're thinking of building your own products and trying to sell to enterprises, platform is actually really critical because you can't move deals forward if you don't have some of these capabilities. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense as to where we see sort of platform PMing, if you will, day to day. I think with that, my definition of platform PM is you are sort of building the machine that builds the machine, right? So I think someone actually posted this in chat as well, something similar, but think of yourself as the PM who's building the foundation that every single product line relies on. So a lot of times it might come across as, oh, platform is overhead, or, oh, I now need to talk to another PM and write this different service. But the case that sort of I make, made in my companies in the past, I make it with people that I talk to is it's truly leverage. Leverage meaning you end up building something that gets reused. And so there's a huge efficiency play there. But from a business standpoint, platform PMing moves really two numbers. And it actually impacts these two numbers. So one is adoption retention. So NRR, like net revenue retention, or GRR, like how many customers are actually renewing. Platform capabilities really move that needle. I've seen that play out in my life, and I'll talk a few examples in a bit. But if I even just go back to the Tesla example, like if the car doesn't open for me in a consistent way using my phone or a watch or the key card, I'm going to get frustrated and I might not buy another Tesla down the line. Same thing with enterprise customers. Like if basic capabilities like single sign-on, or if there are 5 different ways to do the same thing in the product as the product expands, your customers will get frustrated, and that will lead to not a great GRR or NRR for your company. So very, very key. And the second is new deals. And I talked about an example right now, but if you are selling to enterprise customers, this just comes across so many times that there's just no way around it. There's no way you can win a big deal and say that I don't support RBAC, or I don't support single sign-on, or I don't have an API. All these things, you'll get dinged for. So I think that's the case that I'm sort of making here is you're building the factory that builds your different products. And it is hugely important for your adoption retention, very, very important for new deals as well. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to pause here for a second if there are any questions. And if not, I'll move on to my next. Okay, great. Hopefully all that made sense. So let's get into Act 2. Okay, so if I've laid out what I think platform PMing is, and just as a reminder, is the machine that builds the machine, how do you actually do it? If you parachute in today as a PM into a company and you want to get into the platform team, what are the markers you want to look for? Or B, if you are at a point where you're a leader at a company and your company is now starting to sell up market, go enterprise, and you want to build a platform team, how should you think about that? So here is sort of my architecture. Here's the way we did it at Reliance, my previous company. In very large companies, all these boxes here are actually different teams, all under the platform umbrella. I had the privilege to do all of this at the same time and then build a team around it. So I think a great way to think about this is I think a platform has six buckets. One is security. So anything to do with, can a user get into the system? How does a user get in? Is the user authorized to do XYZ? If the user ends up doing a bunch of stuff in our system, is that logged anywhere? I think that's sort of in my security bucket. The second bucket is integrations. Can I use your product with the stack I'm using today? Can I integrate that with other products that I already have, right? Can I use webhooks, connectors? Are you in the marketplace, so on and so forth? The third is APIs and DevEx. So does your product have an API? Can I consume and hit that API? What are the rate limits there? Are there docs? Can my engineers go and read those docs and just build off the top of your API? How do you version your API? There's a lot of stuff that goes in there, but that's kind of the third bucket in my mind. The fourth, I'll say, is telemetry. That's how I bucket it. Anything to do with analytics. So I think a lot of times analytics also fits into product operations in some way. I have sort of always done that within a platform umbrella, if you will. But how are your users using your product? How is consumption telemetry? If you're selling them certain seats, how many seats have they actually used? If you price based on volume, how much volume have they actually consumed, right? If I don't know, service A and service B takes 6 seconds for a call, the product is really slow. Performance, all of that for me goes under like sort of the telemetry bucket. The fifth is all cross-cutting capabilities. So these are like, I think a good way to think about these is like your very sort of traditional PM features, if you will, like notification systems or setting up workflows in your product or having like an issue workflow, connecting with another system, like all these cross-cutting capabilities that every product needs within your portfolio, that fits in this bucket. And finally, I'll say deployment modes. So as you can enterprise, put your enterprise B2B hat on, if you are selling SaaS, are you selling a hybrid? Are you selling on-prem? All of that sort of fits here. Residency and tenancy, like if you're selling it to a customer in Australia, do they want all the data to be in Australia, or are they okay with data being in the US, for example? Or if you're selling it to someone in the EU, there's a bunch of compliance stuff you have to do with GDPR and so on and so forth. So all of that in some way goes into this deployment modes bucket. And I think the way I think about this is these are the six things, and think about your products that you offer as a company all relying on these six things, right? So I don't know, I'm just going to say Salesforce as an example. Actually, let's take maybe Atlassian as an example, like pretty close to you guys. Now they have Jira, they have Confluence, they have Trello, they have Loom. Now, if you use Jira and Confluence, which a lot of us PMs use, like for example, the login is exactly the same, right? Like it's not that for Jira you have to maintain different credentials, for Confluence you have to maintain different credentials. They're likely using a common service at the backend. If you comment something in a Jira ticket, and if you comment something on a Confluence page, a lot of the capability is similar. You can resolve a comment, you can like a comment, you can tag someone in the comment. So it's very likely that that capability probably sits somewhere in this bucket here. So you'll see this happen in the products you use today, where there are these sets of common services that all form under platform, and every product relies on them. So if you take any of these buckets out, your product doesn't work. And that's why I said you're sort of building the machine that builds the rest of the machine for your company. And it's a very critical part in the role. All right. So I'm going to quickly I don't want to dump a lot of information on all of you, but I'm going to quickly go through all these six and just give you like the headlines and the highlights, right? So that just you guys have a mental model of what these things mean. So security, I think the way to think about security is who gets in, what can they do when they get in, and what they just did, right? I think that's the most simplistic way I can think of. So everything to do with single sign-on, Okta, identity providers, provisioning and deprovisioning users. If Sanket is a user in Jira, and if Sanket leaves the company, Sanket shouldn't be able to access that company's Jira instance anymore. All that stuff. Authorization. If Sanket is able to log in, what can he now do in that system? Can he click? Can he open an issue that doesn't belong to his team? Can he comment on an issue that doesn't belong to his team? So that's where role-based access controls, ABAC, all come into play, and it's a huge sort of bucket in itself. Fun fact now, I think so far platform teams have had to deal with human beings for all of this, right? Like Sanket is a human, Adam comes in, Adam is a human being. Now the new conversation is agents. How do we authorize agents? If agents have the permission to do certain things, what can they do? So there's a huge conversation in the industry happening right now on agentic authorization authentication. But that's probably a topic for another day. The final thing I'll say is if Sanket did a bunch of stuff in Jira, can the admin see all of this? So anything to do with these buckets typically falls under security. I think the one sort of learning for me and a very non-obvious insight has been like especially with when you deal with these features, there's no yellow. It's either red or it's green, right? Because imagine if the login service for Atlassian goes down for 10 minutes and all their customers cannot log into Jira or Confluence. Like that's an issue that you don't get like 5 sprints to solve for. That's an issue that you got to solve like right away. So that's the sort of interesting nuance in working in this bucket is these things escalate very quickly. I remember one story, we were doing a migration from a very old permissioning model to a new permissioning system, and we had a script to migrate a bunch of our customers off of the old to the new. And the script ran for like 98% of customers. So one customer didn't run for, and it was one of our biggest customers. And I get a message from my CEO on Slack that, hey, Sanket, what's happening? So the point being, it just escalates so quickly. So that's always a thing to keep in mind as a PM, especially in this bucket, is there's no yellow, it's just red or it's green. Um, integrations, there's a lot to do here, but I think the good way to think about this is, does your product work with the tools your customer already uses, right? So if you're using Jira, does Jira work with Claude? Or does Jira work with Asana, for example? Or does Jira work with GitHub? So all those integrations become a part of the strategy, and there's a lot of strategic things to do here. I led our entire integrations for Reliance in my last in my last gig, and everything to go from what are the integrations that you as a PM should build because they're good for your product and for your company. How do you actually build partnerships with other companies so that you can get access to their APIs and start building integrations with your team? How do you do a lot of self-service? So like docs, support articles. How do you like work with your customer support to get these things out there? And finally, like support and reliability, like because integrations are things that almost every single one of your like customers will use, naturally the amount of tickets and bugs and issues are very high. So working very closely with support. I think a great insight, at least from my perspective on integration, is it's a huge lever for renewal because if you prioritize building the right integrations on, and if you're able to get your product in a very sticky workflow for your customer, which other tools that they use, that's it, you get the renewal for life. So that's where I think a lot of the strategic planning for integration comes in. The one like learning from the trenches, if you will, is I cannot tell you guys how many times I had to like sit with the customer myself to truly figure out why they're asking for an integration. Like it just happens so often that someone has a list of like 50 tools and they come to you as a PM and they're like, hey, I want 50 integrations in the next 2 quarters. And you're like, I can't build 50 integrations. But why do you need these integrations in the first place? So I think The amount of times I've had to do that with customers has been, a lot. And that's something just as a PM, it's really important is how does this move your business goal? And understanding that and then prioritizing that, that truly is the game, I think, in this bucket. Um, I think I'm going to breeze through API and DevEx, but APIs are actually very, very key. Um, any customer, it really depends on your product, but like if I think about, let's say, Jira again, and if I think about a lot of product teams are now getting on Claude Code or they're getting on Codex to do a bunch of stuff, right? Or they're getting on Linear, tools like Linear. And if your product doesn't offer an API or an MCP now for agents, like you don't have a moat anymore. And that is kind of crazy, right? I think this ability or this change for companies to be like, hey, you need an API, otherwise you lose your moat. I think that's a transition that's happening right now in the industry. So everything to do with that. So what should the API be? What should you expose? What should that model be, right? How can customers access your API? How do you make it secure? How do you write documentation for your API? What if you change your API 6 months later? What happens then? How do you version your API? So everything to do with these like five buckets, I would say those are literally all PM things to do. You work very closely with your engineering managers on this, but it's a huge area. But I've seen in bigger companies like Stripe where they literally have like dozens of PMs just on like their API capabilities, which is crazy. Um, the final bucket, the two other buckets quickly, is telemetry. Um, I think the kinds of features that I fit into this is what are your users doing, usage consumption, what features are they using, how often are they logging in, MAUs, DAUs, all the metrics that you can think of, use signal. And the reason I put this under platform is you get to define the framework that other PMs use in the company, right? So if you have like Jira, Confluence, Loom, Trello, they all likely need their own analytics, and every PM gets to decide that. But what tool to use for the analytics? What are the endpoints you got to expose in your product to consume that telemetry? All that is a lot of platform thinking. So that's where, in my mind, it fits under platform. There's a lot of like pricing and packaging telemetry. So when you're selling these products, right? If Atlassian is selling Jira, they're likely selling it on seats, or maybe they have a different metric. So, how many seats have you consumed? Someone has to figure that out in the company so that you know what to charge your customer for. So, all of that comes under like pricing, packaging, telemetry. So, all the features there sort of come under this bucket. Performance telemetry is your system actually performing normally or not? And then there's a lot of internal observability that probably I won't get into right now. The one insight I want to share though is I think with telemetry, it feels very internal that, oh, okay, great. This is like how are user using it and how's performance, how many things they've consumed. The one thing that happened with us is when we built this at Reliance, it became so popular internally, especially with our customer success teams, that they started using that in value conversations they were having. Stuff like, hey, you bought X, Y, and Z, but you only use 60% of it, and you're close to your renewal. So what is blocking you from using the other 40%? So it sort of unlocks these other conversations that was really like a second order effect in my mind. So that was like a very interesting thing where initially I thought telemetry is all internal, but there's a lot of value for your customer success teams, for your customers themselves to use that telemetry data themselves. So a very, very critical thing in my mind. All right, two more things in this bucket, cross-cutting capabilities. I talked about this a little bit, but think of everything that I'll maybe come back to my Jira example again. Think of that little notification bell that you get when someone assigns you a ticket, or if someone mentions you in a Confluence page. They're all shared. It's all the same service, right? So different products like Jira and Confluence are using the same mechanism to deliver you notifications. So that's a great example of a shared sort of feature that just every product has to use. Think of things like issue workflows, like someone in your product is saying, hey, I completed this, or I checked this off, or I'm commenting XYZ, I'm tagging another user. All these are shared capabilities that your platform team will build and they'll provide. Um, I think the key thing to remember that I learned is actually building these features is really easy. The hardest part, especially in this bucket, is working with other PMs. And not because like other PMs are giving you a hard time, but every PM obviously has very strong opinions on certain things, especially in their product. And now what you're doing is you are sort of laying out a roadmap that if you're touching the shared capability, here's how it will work. If you want to export data from a platform, here's the API that we provide. Or if you want to build a notification bell, here's the UX design that I think is right. So just like aligning with other PMs and other stakeholders in this is sort of was underrated in some ways. I just figured it'll be easy to just build it and ship it. So that really comes into play, especially in this bucket. And the final thing I'll add in this framework I have is deployment modes. I think this is a question that'll keep coming up again and again, is especially as you move up market, is are you in SaaS? Do you support on-prem or not? Do you have a hybrid version? Will I see my sensitive data leaving my environment if I use your product? um, Data residency, you're selling into EU or somewhere in the US or in a very regulated industry, this was going to come up a lot. It's like, where does the data live? Multi-tenancy. A lot of customers ask about like, how are your tenants separated? Is my data safe? Is it just my data in my sort of quote unquote tenant, or do I share the data with other tenants as well? So a lot of these like infrastructure type questions come up, which all in my mind live under this bucket of platform. The hard part with this specific bucket that I found was I actually inherited this in my previous role, and it gets very technical. So this is like, especially like deployment modes and data residency gets like, you start talking about like Kubernetes pods and so on and so forth. And for me, that was very technical. So you need a very strong engineering leader here with you, like as your sort of partner, if you will. And if you find yourself in this situation, you got to sort of carve out your role, right? Like, I think for me, my role was, hey, I'm going to be the person who's going to look at new deals and I'm going to approve. Can we actually do this for X customer or not? Or I'm going to be a person who's going to explain all this to the sales team. There's nothing that gives you a sharper read on what sales and customers would actually care about when you start translating all these technical concepts into a language that they can understand. It's actually quite interesting. So that's sort of my learning from the trenches, if you will, is you got to carve out your role if you end up finding yourself in this bucket on like where does engineering step up and where do you step up and what your role is. And in my view, your role really becomes more go to market here, if you will, while your engineering leaders can actually take care of the specifics of like residency and deployment modes and so on and so forth. All right, I'm going to do time check. I know we're kind of getting close to time, so I'm going to maybe blaze through this final act three, if you will. Just to summarize, we talked about what platform PMs do, what they are. We talked about the six buckets, what the framework is, if you will. That's a map that you can use if you find yourself in this role. Now, what does it mean for you, right? Why should you care about platform PMing? Where do you actually see these kinds of roles? And what's happening in the industry right now? So I think the most interesting thing that's happening right now that I did not predict, I think a lot of us did not predict, is how AI is actually pushing all SaaS to be headless. And by headless, I mean like, when you're using Claude Code, you don't care what the UI for like Jira looks like, right? You only care if Jira has an MCP server or not that you can use and, you know, have your agent solve a bunch of tickets. Same with Salesforce. Like Salesforce is like one of those legacy companies in SaaS, but they made the decision to go headless like last month or a couple of months back. And that's kind of crazy. And I think all the moat is actually moving down to this layer where platform sits. As UIs get commoditized, everyone can build a UI now, right? As agents become first class citizens, as like sort of your moat continues to change, it all is coming back to the platform. So it's all very interesting actually what's happening in the platform world, especially with AI, and it's becoming even more and more relevant now. I think for you, if you're listening to this and you're like, hey, why should I be a platform PM? I think it's kind of one of the fastest ways to get to like a staff plus skill set, if you will, like if you're early in your career. There's a lot of influencing because, if I go back to my framework, like you are sitting at the foundation. So anything that you do impacts all of the product lines. So it's kind of crazy how much time you'll spend up coordinating with other people, other PMs. So there's a lot of those skills that you get. Systems thinking, this is huge. Like literally start thinking in terms of reusable components. So you're not like a feature PM, right? You're not thinking of a specific feature. You're thinking about how do I build this that is reusable so that every other feature can use this. So I think that's a big skill set you get. Technical depth, I think, like I said, I think if you have technical curiosity, I think there's a whole ocean of stuff you can dive deep into with platform PMing. And fourth, I would say is kind of selling the invisible a little bit. Like it's a challenge to get your account executives be excited about a hybrid deployment model, but you have to do it. And once you start speaking in their language, there's a lot of skills that you get to learn. So I think, I mean, for personally for me, it's just been so valuable and so helpful. So, and I think these are all the things that I've gotten from being a platform and leading a team there. Um, when does your team need one? I would say if you're at like a 5-person startup, you don't need a platform PM. Like your engineering lead can very well do that role, right? But if you start to move up market, if you start selling to other enterprises, you'll start seeing those questionnaires. You start seeing single sign-on RBAC, like that's your cue. Or if you start selling into regulated industries, like they will need a lot of these promises that only platform teams can build on. Or if you see that in your company you're solving the same problem in 3 ways, that's already a problem. So that's where you need some of the platform thinking. And finally, like, yeah, if deals are truly stalling on platform gaps, if like customers are like, man, I can't move forward with your company because I need like ABAC or I need single sign-on or user provisioning and group sync, that's your cue there where you need probably a good platform team. I have two final things to add before I sort of shut up. Where do you actually see this role open? Like, I always use Claude to do a little bit of analysis for me, but I think in companies, and placing is a good example, but where you have multiple products, API first approaches, or companies are moving up market, you see these roles open. So like Stripe, Twilio, you see Snowflake, Salesforce, HubSpot, Figma, Notion, all of these teams, all of these companies have platform teams, have platform PM. So very hot role, if you will, and especially getting more and more relevant now. So I guess my takeaway from all of this and from all the three acts would be that don't think of platform as overhead. Don't think of it as like, hey, this is back end work. It's true leverage that you get to create in your company and in your product. It moves NRR, GRR, it moves retention, it moves your deal flow. And yeah, you sort of build something once and it just pays off multiple times down the line. So I'm going to pause here now. I know that was a 45 minutes of a lot of information, but hopefully that made sense. And I'm going to pause if there are any questions from the group.
Thanks, Sanket. Yeah, we do have a couple minutes here. Super interesting. Dude, I took so many notes, and I know we held on to a very large group of people that signed up for the webinar as well. So that's always a good indication. But yeah, while some folks think of any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat or unmute. One thing I'd just like to start off with is I really like how commercially you think about what is typically a very technical type of role, and especially how you framed it around the leverage you can get from it. I hadn't thought about it like that before, and especially the telemetry example you provided and how AEs, sales reps, etc., can use that to be able to have just more informed conversations with customers so that you can drive expansion, renewal, those types of things. And you also just come across as a really good citizen as well. I love that. One question I I've multiple, but I'll just start with one, is you you mentioned like needing to sit with customers for understanding more deeply around what type of integrations you should create, what are the use cases that you should be solving for. Um, Tell me a little bit more about what do you think the world of discovery looks like for platform PMs? Because it's going to change, at least from what I'm seeing, in terms of how folks are using Claude, using other types of systems, MCP integrations. What is that? Do you think there's going to be a change in how folks do discovery?
I think that's a great question, by the way. And I think the fundamentals of discovery will still be the same in my mind. I think with platformy things like integrations, MCPs, what I would encourage people to really understand is imagine you had this capability, Mr. or Miss Customer. How does this move the needle on whatever business goal you're trying to achieve? And if getting that understanding is really key, because I think here's what happens with some of these platformy things is customers are like shopping around in the market for different products, and like for some reason they'll have a list of like, hey, I need 50 integrations, and hey, this other product is giving me 500 integrations and you're giving me 495, so that product must be better, right? And then you start quizzing them on, okay, what do you need from those 495 integrations? If your goal in Q1 is to whatever do XYZ, tell me how those 495 integrations move that needle for you. And I think that discovery with MCPs, it gets even more critical because as software is going headless, like everything is sort of coming back to a one workflow with from a chat window or whatever, Claude or Chat GPT. So I think like going back to the fundamental of like, if I give you X, how does that help your business? I think understanding that I think is becoming even more and more important now.
Yeah, great. Makes sense. Thanks. Jamie's got a question. Go for it, Jamie. Unmute yourself.
Yeah. Thanks, Sanket. That was awesome. That was really, really awesome, man. Uh, I'm currently in the space at the moment, and uh, honestly, it's probably the hardest product space I've ever been in. Um, like the way, candidly, the way you've kind of described it is like kind of rose tinted glasses. My experience so far is that it's kind of like two steps forward, three steps backwards in terms of how a platform is supposed to kind of support the wider goals. We're constantly kind of finding like you're battling, advancing your own roadmap against like the ad hoc requests of teams. Like you want to build an API, there's not enough time, so they just keep requesting the data from you. And when you try and pull the brakes on like outside requests, we've also found partner teams can't wait. They do workarounds, and then you have just a whole bunch of like horrible, um, like horrible code like all over the
Yeah.
place that you need to kind of clean up. I guess I just wanted to hear from you like the because the other thing, generally speaking, is leaders don't really understand platforms. They don't understand how to prioritize it either. They just understand how to prioritize like the end result. So like, yeah, just curious to hear from you, like your war stories on kind of that and how you've been able to maybe drive like a platform team like to success.
Yeah. Jamie, great question. And I completely agree. I think that fear of like, hey, I've got requests from like 10 other teams, and if I say no to five of them, they'll build their own thing and the product will be fragmented. I think that is a very real fear. And I think for me, this is where it's really critical to lobby for your agenda internally. And it's easier said than done, obviously, but there are two ways that I think at least I've tried to do it in some reasonable success, some failures. I think one is I have always been close to all other PMs in the company that I've been in because if I know that, Jamie, if you know that, okay, hey, my agenda is to launch this audit logging capability in 6 months, like we're trying to redo that framework, right? And I know this other PM is launching a feature that has an audit log. So one of my war stories was this exact same scenario where me and my team were redoing our entire audit logging framework. This other PM had an audit log in their product. So just sort of staying close to that and intercepting at the right point is like, hey, if you're, by the way, doing an audit log, why don't you use this new framework that we are building? And then using that as a success story to go to other PMs and say, hey, look, one PM is already on board. Now, why don't you use the same framework? So I think it takes time in some cases, but staying close to other PMs, that has always helped, like making friends with them. I think that is very critical. And to your point of, hey, the leadership doesn't understand platform, I think, Jamie, that is exactly where I feel like it's so useful to, and I'm going to go here, it's so useful to translate that in these two terms, right? Like, hey, if we don't build this audit log feature in the last 2 quarters, we've lost 3 deals worth X amount of dollars who wanted audit log capabilities to go out in the scene too. Like, this is what you're missing. And if this other team ends up building their ad hoc thing, guess what? We're going to keep seeing that. So I think it's a hard thing to do for sure. But I think translating that into NRR, GRR, and revenue is where I think is the only way, honestly, to advance your agenda, if you will.
Got one question
Uh,
from Morgan. We've probably only got time for one more, really. But it's to clarify how to best to make the move from a traditional PM role into this space. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well, because you've made it sound very exciting and I think a very future-proofed role as well.
yeah, I'm glad it sounds exciting. Morgan, I would say it really depends on obviously what you're interested in, but let's say keeping that aside for a second, I would say the best way to do it is this bucket here, cross-cutting capabilities. I think if you are in like a traditional PM role right now, this will be the bucket that feels very close to you, right? Because these are, think of the standard features, right? Like, hey, notifications, what's the UX design? Let me write a PRD. Let me write up stories for it. So I think this bucket is probably a good like way to get in. Start taking up features here. Like if your company is working on a shared thing, like notifications, workflows, issues, whatnot, try leading those features and then start applying some system thinking there. Um, that probably is the, I think, the easiest way in my mind to get in. The second easy way in some ways is telemetry. I think there's another bucket, and I like to keep this in the platform. Is every PM needs analytics. Maybe you're using Amplitude, Pendo, Posthog, whatnot. But if you end up defining a common framework on using that telemetry and how those analytics should be implemented, that's a great start. Like that's already a system in place, and then sort of again be friends with other PMs, get their buy-in, and then ship that. I think those two are like good ways to start getting your hands sort of dirty in platform work.
Great advice. Agree